The kitchen exhaust fans had been broken for 3 weeks. Nobody had come to fix them. At 2:47 in the morning, Jin Seo stood in the silence they left behind and looked at a woman who had no idea she was changing him. She was asleep in booth 4, her head resting on her forearm, her locks spilling across the table in a dark curtain. Her apron was still tied. Her order pad sat beside her hand like she'd meant to put it away and simply ran out of time to do it. The name tag on her chest read Amara in letters that had started to peel at the corner. She was 5 feet 4 inches of complete exhaustion, and she was the most dignified thing in the room. Jin set down the industrial cleaning cloth he'd been using on the baseboards and stood very still. He was not supposed to care about this. He was not supposed to feel anything except what his assignment required. But the assignment had started to feel dishonest in a way that 6 months of running Seo Group's entire restaurant division had never once felt. Welcome back, friends. This is Prince of Afro-Korean stories, where passion, danger, and impossible romance intersect. Please keep sharing your ideas for future episodes. And kindly like, share, and subscribe, and activate notifications so you never miss our latest content. Then drop a comment telling me your location, Seoul, Chicago, somewhere between. I want to know who's bold enough to hear what really happened. His father, Park Seo, had been called many things in Korean business circles. The newspapers favored words like titan and visionary. The people who'd lost their companies to him used other words. His employees, the ones brave enough, called him the king. His rivals called him something darker, something that came with a particular hand gesture and a lowered voice. Jin had grown up understanding that power was the only language worth learning. He had not understood, until this moment, watching a woman sleep in a booth because she was too tired to drive home, exactly what that education had cost. He pulled out his personal phone, the one nobody at corporate knew existed, and opened the back-end portal for Seo Group's scheduling system. He'd built it himself during his MBA program, a source of pride then. A tool of damage, he was starting to understand now. He scrolled to Amara Osei's profile. 28 years old. Accounting degree from Georgia State, 6 years prior. Listed emergency contact, mother, Amara Osei. Current status, 4th consecutive week of 6-day scheduling, 3 of 7 shifts extending past midnight. He made changes. Quietly, the way damage is often done, and the way repair rarely is. It was the 2nd week Jin had been inside the restaurant, going by the name J, applying as a maintenance contractor through a shell staffing agency his assistant had set up with 0 questions and significant discretion. 6'2" of lean muscle and sharp angles in a borrowed Dickies uniform, trying very hard not to move like a man who owned the building. He was not succeeding as well as he'd hoped. Amara had clocked him on day 3. Not who he was. Just that he wasn't what he was pretending to be. He could see it in the way she watched him from across the room, her dark brown eyes catching everything, filing it somewhere she'd return to later. She was the kind of woman who noticed the things people work to hide. The morning she finally spoke to him directly, he was on his knees replacing a screw in a booth leg that had been loose long enough for a regular customer to file 3 written complaints. Amara stopped beside him, refilling sugar caddies with the particular efficiency of someone who had learned to absorb every task into a single continuous motion, and she said, without looking at him, "You hold that screwdriver like somebody gave it to you yesterday." Jin looked up. Her face was round and full, dark brown skin smooth and even, high cheekbones sitting below eyes that had enough depth in them to make a person uncomfortable. Her locks were pulled back and pinned, a single strand having escaped near her right temple. She was the kind of beautiful that didn't ask for anything. "I learn fast," he said. She looked at him then, fully, for the first time. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy some internal question she hadn't shared. "You learn fast," she repeated, and walked away. The manager at that location was a man named Gerald Hines, 56, with a salt and pepper mustache and the particular confidence of someone who had never once been held accountable for anything. He ran the floor like a military operation in which he was always the general and everyone else was infantry he could afford to lose. Jin had watched him twice already dock hourly staff for bathroom breaks, a practice so brazenly illegal that Jin had had to excuse himself to the supply closet to process his own role in tolerating it. The night Gerald called Amara into the office, Jin was cleaning the glass on the dessert display case near enough to hear the conversation through the poorly insulated wall. "The DOL has been asking questions," Gerald said, his voice carrying the specific menace of a small man with temporary authority. "I need everyone on the same page. You talk to inspectors, you're off the schedule. You're not just off my schedule. I know every GM in this region. There was a pause. Jin found himself holding the cleaning cloth very still. Then Amara's voice, even and quiet and absolutely unbendable. I hear you, Gerald. Not yes. Not agreement. Just acknowledgement, delivered so cleanly that it could not be used against her. Jin recognized the intelligence in it the way you recognize a language you were raised speaking. She came out of the office a minute later and resumed rolling silverware without breaking pace. Her jaw was set. Her hands were steady. Jin watched her and felt something in his chest shift around like furniture being moved in a room he hadn't entered in years. He told himself it was guilt. It was easier than the alternative. The thing about watching someone do extraordinary labor is that eventually you stop being able to unsee it. Jin had built his understanding of restaurant operations from spreadsheets and performance metrics and quarterly presentations in rooms where nobody had ever tied an apron. He had approved a concept called the lean floor model, which his operations team had celebrated with a catered lunch, which now struck him as cosmically inappropriate. The lean floor model meant fewer staff on shift, higher per-server table ratios, and bonuses for managers who came in under labor budget. What it meant on the actual floor was Amara covering 14 tables alone during a Saturday lunch rush while also running her own food from the window because they were short in expo. He watched her do it. Not gracefully, because grace implied ease, and there was nothing easy about it. She did it with the kind of controlled precision that comes from having no margin for error and knowing it. When a table of 8 sat down in her section 15 minutes before her scheduled end, she didn't flinch. She smiled. A professional smile, practiced and warm, that Jin was beginning to understand cost her something real every time she deployed it. The real smile was different. He'd seen it once when a little girl at table 3 had handed Amara a crayon drawing of a flower. The dimple in her left cheek appeared. Her eyes went soft and wholly unguarded. It lasted 4 seconds and it rearranged something in him permanently. He started finding reasons to be nearby her section. You still with me? Comment below if you're feeling what I'm feeling right now because this story is about to go somewhere none of us expected. She caught him at it on a Tuesday. She was rolling more silverware, her slender fingers moving with the automatic fluency of someone who had done it 10,000 times, and she said without preamble, "Why are you always over here? The baseboards in this section need more attention." The baseboards, she repeated, her tone indicating precisely what she thought of that explanation. Right. She went back to rolling silverware. Jin went back to the baseboards. Neither of them spoke for 2 minutes that felt considerably longer. You went to school, she said finally. Not a question. Yes. For what? He considered. Business. She made a sound that could have been agreement or could have been the quietest possible laugh. Lot of business people end up in restaurant maintenance. Lot of accountants end up serving tables. The silverware rolling stopped for exactly 1 second before resuming. Fair, she said, and the single word carried more grace than the entire conversation deserved. Her roommate was a woman named Priya, a physical therapist who texted Amara at 11 p.m. asking if she was alive, because she'd learned not to assume. Jin found this out inadvertently, the way you find out things about people when you're around them enough, when Amara's phone buzzed loudly on the break room table one night and she glanced at it and typed back a rapid reply, then said quietly to nobody in particular, "She worries." Someone should, Jin said, before he could stop himself. Amara looked at him across the break room table. The overhead light in there had been flickering for a month. He'd submitted the maintenance request himself through channels he shouldn't have known existed, attributed it to a contractor ID that didn't lead anywhere real. It still hadn't been fixed. She was sitting under its irregular light and looking at him with an expression he couldn't decode. Who worries about you? She asked. Nobody, was the honest answer. His father issued directives. His board tracked his performance. His college friends texted him about golf. None of that was worry. I manage fine, he said. That's not what I asked. He didn't have an answer for that. She didn't push for one, which he suspected was a form of mercy. The schedule changes had taken effect that week. Amara had noticed, he could tell by the slight furrow between her brows every time she checked the posted sheet, the way she turned it over and her expression without landing anywhere. She didn't say anything about it. She was the kind of person who filed things away until she had enough information to act on them properly. The Department of Labor investigator came on a Thursday morning, a woman named Sandra Ellison, unhurried and thorough, with a recorder and a clipboard and the particular patience of someone who had heard every version of the same lie. Gerald met her at the door and spent 40 minutes being extremely cooperative, which Jean recognized from the inside as the cooperation of someone buying time. After she left, Gerald gathered the floor staff in the dining room. He stood with his thumbs in his belt loops and delivered the speech with the tone of a man who had given it before and expected it to land the same way it always had. "You don't know anything," he said. "You don't remember anything. You keep your jobs or you don't, and in this industry that decision follows you." The room was quiet in a way that meant people were afraid. Jean stood at the edge of it and counted the faces. 12 people. Between them, in rough estimation, maybe 24 dependents, based on what he'd overheard in the break room over 7 weeks. A number that had never appeared in any report he'd signed. Amara was standing near the window. Her arms were crossed. She was looking at Gerald with her jaw set and her eyes steady, and Jean thought she looked like someone deciding something. He was right. That afternoon, during the dead hour between lunch and dinner, she found Jean replacing a ceiling tile in the back hallway, and she said, "I'm talking to the investigator." He came down from the step stool. "Okay. Gerald will make it difficult. I know. It could take a long time. These cases always do. I know that too." She studied him, and he held still for it, which was harder than it should have been. "Why do you know so much about labor law cases, Jay?" "I read." She looked at him the way you look at something that almost makes sense. "You're not who you say you are." It wasn't a question. He said nothing. "You're not going to tell me?" "Not yet," he said honestly. The honesty seemed to land somewhere, even if the answer didn't. She held his gaze a moment longer, then nodded, a single precise motion, and walked back toward the floor. It was the not yet that kept him awake that night. It implied a future in which he would tell her. It implied that the future was one he was already constructing in his mind, building it quietly in the hours when he should have been thinking about shareholder calls and pending acquisitions and the 11 other things that required Seo Group's CEO to exist in the world as himself. He was not doing a good job of being himself lately. He was doing, he reluctantly admitted, a better job of being someone worth being. If this hooked you already, don't forget to subscribe, like, and drop a comment because what happens next will absolutely shatter your expectations. The confrontation happened on a Wednesday, which he would later think was appropriate. Wednesday had no drama attached to it. It was just the middle of the week, a day for things that needed to be done. Amara had found the video herself. She'd gotten the name from somewhere, pieced it together the way she pieced everything together, with careful patience and lateral thinking, and she'd watched the keynote address Jean had given at the National Restaurant Association conference 2 years prior. 12 minutes of himself in a charcoal suit that cost $4,000, standing in front of a graph titled, "The Future of Labor Optimization," explaining, with what he now recognized as obscene confidence, that service industry workers needed to embrace flexible scheduling as a feature of modern employment rather than resisting it as an imposition. She was waiting for him in the parking lot after close. Her locks were loose around her shoulders. She was wearing her own clothes, a simple dark green dress, and the contrast with the uniform he'd only ever seen her in made her look like herself in a way that clarified something he hadn't had language for. This was who she was when the restaurant didn't have claim to her. She was fuller somehow. More present. She held up her phone. The video was paused on his face, mid-sentence, chin lifted, completely certain of himself. Jean stopped walking. "Flexible scheduling as a feature," she said. Her voice was not raised. It was the more frightening thing, perfectly level, like she'd already passed through the anger and come out on the other side into something colder and more permanent. "That's what you called it." He didn't insult her by pretending. "Yes." "How many locations does Seo Group operate?" 87. "And you came here?" "To this one." "To do what, exactly?" "Watch what your features look like up close." "To understand what I'd built." "And do you?" She stepped closer. She smelled like coffee and the faintest trace of something floral, and he was furious at himself for noticing. "Do you understand it?" "Yes." "Tell me what you understand." He met her eyes. Brown eyes that had witnessed his company, his policies, his inherited and carefully maintained indifference in the form of a profit margin, grind her down to the person sleeping in booth 4 at 3 in the morning. "I understand that I built a system that treats people's time as a resource to be extracted at minimum cost. I understand that I signed reports that made that sound like efficiency. I understand that I came here because I needed to see a face attached to the data, and that I found yours, and that I have been trying to figure out how to account for that since week 2. Silence. You let me trust you, she said. Yes. You sat across from me in that break room and let me think you were someone who understood what this was like. I was starting to understand what this was like. That is not the same thing. No, he said. It isn't. She looked at him for a long time. The parking lot lights hummed above them. Somewhere down the block, a car alarm went off and stopped. He did not look away from her face, because she deserved at least that, the full weight of what she was saying received by someone willing to hold it. I'm testifying, she said. The investigator has documentation. I have 4 other servers who are ready. Gerald threatened us, which the investigator is also very interested in, and I want you to know that I'm doing it regardless of whatever you do next. Good, he said. She blinked. You should. It's right. I won't obstruct it. I won't send lawyers to delay it. Whatever it costs me, that's what it costs. Don't do that. Don't make this about your sacrifice. It's not sacrifice. It's consequence. He exhaled. There's a difference. She studied his face in the orange light. He couldn't read what she found there, which was unusual. He was very good at reading rooms. He was finding that Amara Osei was not a room. She was a whole geography. Go home, Jean, she said, and the use of his actual name landed like a door closing gently but firmly. I have things to do that don't involve you. He went home. He did not sleep. If you're still here, subscribe, because stories like this only work when people stay. The board meeting lasted 4 hours. Jean sat at the head of the table in his rightful clothes, his rightful chair, and put forward a restructuring proposal that his CFO called visionary in the tone people use when they mean catastrophic. Profit sharing. Audited wage transparency. Elimination of the lean floor model. Independent labor oversight. Retroactive compensation review going back 3 years. His father called during the 15-minute recess and spoke for 6 of them. Jean stood at the window with the phone against his ear and let the voice wash over him, all its disappointment and its authority and its accumulated certainty that wealth was its own moral justification, and when it stopped he said, quietly, I know, Dad, and ended the call. The vote was 7-4 against him. He overrode it with his majority stake and accepted the board's subsequent demand for his resignation as CEO by offering an immediate transition to an external candidate of their choice and funding the transition himself. His lawyer sat beside him during this and did not speak because Jean had, prior to the meeting, told her clearly that his job was not to minimize the cost. The settlement negotiations took 3 months. The number that emerged from them was $31 million, distributed among 389 current and former Seo Group restaurant employees across 11 locations. Amara testified for 3.5 hours and never once looked at him except at the end, when she was gathering her things, and for exactly 4 seconds their eyes met across the conference room table in a way that said everything neither of them had found words for yet. Jean moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Koreatown, the second bedroom becoming an office where he consulted for a labor advocacy nonprofit whose annual budget was roughly equivalent to what Seo Group's hospitality division had spent on its annual leadership retreat. His father released a public statement. The business press wrote the story as a cautionary tale about idealism and corporate governance. A podcast spent 2 episodes analyzing what they called his strategic surrender. He did not listen to either episode. He did not contact Amara. He had not earned the right yet, and he knew it, and he was trying to learn the difference between patience and avoidance. Amara took a position as financial director at the Seo Group Workers Foundation, a body established with Jin's liquidated assets and run entirely independently of any Seo family influence, by design and by legal structure. She wore her locks in different styles each week. Box braids 1 week, a pineapple updo the next, a full loose wash and go that made her whole face softer. She'd had her nails done for the first time in 2 years, a short simple burgundy, and she noticed herself noticing that detail, noticed the way having time to do the small things felt like being given something back. They saw each other at quarterly oversight meetings, professional and courteous, both of them navigating the live wire of their history with careful footwork, until the evening they ended up alone in the elevator after a particularly difficult budget discussion and Amara said, to the elevator doors, "You've been different lately." Different from what? Different from the man in that video. Different from the man in the parking lot. A pause. More like Jay. The elevator opened. They both stepped out into the lobby and stood on the marble floor that Jean had once walked across without registering its cost or what it represented. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Ask." Dinner. Not as colleagues. Not as whatever we were at the restaurant. As whatever comes next, if you're willing to find out what that is. Amara was quiet for a moment. The lobby was emptying around them, people moving past toward the doors, toward their evenings, their own complications and careful repairs. I'm not easy, she said. I know. I'm not going to pretend the beginning didn't happen. I'm not going to reframe it into something cleaner because it's more comfortable. I would not ask you to. She looked at him then, the full Amara look, the one that catalogued and considered and did not rush itself. His face under the lobby lights, the lines that hadn't been there 2 years ago, the hands that no longer looked like they'd been maintained, the way he held himself differently now, upright but without the armor of certainty he'd worn at that conference. Dinner, she said. But I'm choosing the restaurant. She chose a West African spot in Inglewood run by a Ghanaian family who'd been operating out of the same building for 11 years. The jollof rice arrived in a cast iron pan. The lights were warm and low. Jin ate everything on his plate, which made Amara's mother, who appeared briefly from the kitchen having been called by her daughter, approve of him with a nod that Amara later called the highest possible score. They talked for 4 hours. About his father and hers, about Georgia and Seoul and the particular loneliness of being the person a family has built its hopes around. About the accounting degree she was deciding whether to return to or leave behind permanently. About what it meant to change and whether changed was a destination or just a direction. I keep waiting to find the version of you that was performing, Amara said, over the last of the chin-chin the owner had brought them unbidden. The version that did all of this for optics. And? I haven't found it yet. That's because it isn't there. She looked at him. The candlelight caught the gold undertones in her dark skin, the small silver hoops in her ears that he'd come to understand she never took out, her grandmother's. Her locks fell past her shoulders tonight. It might take me a long time to fully trust this, she said. I want you to know that going in. I have time. You're not allowed to be impatient. I won't be. And if you ever put efficiency language anywhere near our relationship, I will leave immediately. His mouth pulled at the corner. Understood. The Seo Workers Foundation opened a financial literacy center 8 months later in the same neighborhood as the original restaurant. Amara ran the programming. She taught twice a week herself, to groups of service workers learning to navigate benefit systems and saving structures that nobody had ever explained to them plainly. She wore glasses now during sessions, small gold frames that she had resisted purchasing for 2 years because of the cost and now refused to feel guilty about. Booth 4 from the original restaurant had been preserved and installed in the center's small common room, cleaned and refinished, a modest plaque affixed to the table. It read, "This is where Amara Osei rested." She was not forgotten. She was already exactly what this place would become. Jean had commissioned it, but the words had been Priya's, who had strong opinions about how the story should be told and had made them known with the confidence of a woman who had spent a year watching her best friend fight for something real. On the afternoon of the center's opening, Jean found Amara in the common room, sitting on the far side of booth 4 with a folder of program proposals, her locks pinned up, reading glasses on, a half-eaten granola bar on the table beside her, fully herself in the way that he had spent a long time learning to see clearly. He sat down across from her and set 2 coffees between them, the way someone does when they have decided, simply and without ceremony, to stay. She looked up. The left cheek dimple appeared. "You made it to the end," he said. "Of what?" "Whatever this has been." He wrapped his hands around his cup. The scars on his knuckles were fully healed but still visible. He'd stopped covering them. The hardest part. She considered this, turning her coffee cup. Her nails were a dark plum today. "I think the hardest part was the beginning," she said. "This part is just the work. Is that okay? The work is my favorite part." She pulled the folder open between them. "Now help me look at these proposals. You know how to read a budget." "I do. Don't let it go to your head." "Never again," he said, and meant it entirely, and she looked at him over the rim of her glasses and chose, again, to believe him, which is the thing that makes any of this possible, not the grand gestures or the settlements or the public accounting, but the choice, made quietly, on an ordinary afternoon, to try once more. Outside, the neighborhood went about its business. Inside, 2 people sat across from each other in a salvaged booth and built something that didn't have a name yet, which was fine, because the best things rarely do until they're finished, and they were nowhere near finished. "We've reached the conclusion of our compelling African-Korean story. If this story moved you, smash that like button so hard it breaks and subscribe for more incredible true stories that prove love can heal the deepest wounds. Share this story with someone if you believe in second chances. But I absolutely cannot make it happen without your support. Your support means everything to me. If you made it all the way to the end, you are an absolute legend. Drop a comment below telling us your favorite moments. I read every single one. Let us know. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.